In this video, we're going to look at the top 5 most common questions that 7-Eleven ask in their interviews, and I'm going to help you plan fantastic answers that will get 7-Eleven really interested in hiring you. So let's start with a question that comes up in every 7-Eleven interview and is often one of the big questions that they base their hiring decision on. So if you screw this question up, you are not going to get a job there. And the question is simply, what times can you work at 7-Eleven? And they will want to see certain things. They want to see flexibility. They want to see that you can do lots of different times and that you're going to be available when they need people. You have to also show that you have a can do attitude. So if they ever ask you, can you work at these times? You want to be saying yes to as much as possible. Because if you start saying no to lots of different times and ruling out times, then that causes them to question your commitment to the job. Do you actually take this job seriously, or is everything else in your life way more important and you don't really care about this job? And they will screen people out that say no to too much. So the other trick is to talk specifically about the times that they like to hear. 7-Eleven like to hear weekends, slightly more difficult to staff the stores in that times. Evenings, again, is another important part because 7-Elevens are often open 24/7, so evenings need to be staffed. The peak trading hours for 7-Eleven are unsurprisingly around 7 to 11. So mentioning those times is a good one, saying, I'm happy to work 7 to 11, though I can do other times. But generally, this is where your store is going to be the most busy, and I'm always going to be available at those times. You should also note that it's a 24-hour store, so you can work on the night shift. So if you're happy to work nights, that is also very helpful to the company, and the chances are you'll be paid slightly better for doing that. So now that we know how to answer that question, we can look at the next question, which is how would you manage an angry or irate customer? So unfortunately, in this industry, you're going to have to deal with some very unpleasant and very rude and angry people. And there is a simple procedure to answer a question that asks about anything to do with angry customers, complaining customers, customers refusing to accept returns policies, anything like that can always be answered in the same way. So anything with bad customers, you always use this method. So you start by mentioning the fact that you're always going to stay calm. You're never going to raise your voice. You're never going to shout back. You're always going to be calm and professional and represent the 7-Eleven brand positively. The next thing you mention is you simply say that I will always follow 7-Eleven policy. So if someone is not due a refund for something, you will not issue a refund. If the policy says that you have to consult your manager, you will consult the manager before doing something. So you're always going to follow the policy. And then the last clever phrase to get in there is de-escalation techniques. So your goal is to calm the customer down, get the situation under control, and maintain a positive and friendly store environment. So get those 3 ideas about staying calm, following the policies, and using de-escalation techniques, and you're going to smash this question. So let's look at the next question, which is what do you know about 7-Eleven? And in order to be successful in any interview, you have to absolutely know the company that you're applying to. And so you're going to start with knowing the things that everyone knows. So know the basics of the company. You should obviously know that 7-Eleven is a convenience store brand. And you should also know where the term 7-Eleven comes from, because that's where their opening hours used to be before they were 24 hours, that they would open at 7 in the morning and close at 11 o'clock at night, which was very abnormal at the times when they brought that in. So that's where the name comes from, and you definitely need to know that. You should be aware of the number of stores. So at the time of making this video, they're hovering around 70,000, though that is likely to increase over time. So look up the most recent number. That's a great fact to mention. You should know about July the 11th, because when you write the date, that is 7-Eleven, which is sometimes called 7-Eleven Day, and they run various promotions at that time. So that's a good date to mention in your interview. You should know all of their products, so this famous Slurpee, and they also offer financial services that maybe some people don't know about. So prepaid cards and money transfers can be done in stores, and that is really useful to a lot of customers, particularly in more rural areas. So it provides very important services to the community. And 7-Eleven was also one of the first stores, or actually rather the first store, to really push coffee to go, and you could go in, get coffee, and take it out. That was a real innovation. You should also be aware of the fact that they are now part of a Japanese conglomerate. They're owned by 7 & I Holdings. So that's a good fact to get in there. And then the history of 7-Eleven is worth knowing. So it was founded by Joe C. Thompson. It started as a Southland Ice Company. So originally people would buy ice for an ice box. So this predates when people had freezers. So they would store things that were supposed to be cold in boxes with ice, big blocks of ice that took ages to melt. And the Southland Ice Company started selling some other products like the sort of things that you would find in your freezer, and they would sell that along with the ice. And that was the start of the company. Then they became totem stores because one of the stores put a totem pole outside and they got known as that. And then they changed to their modern name of 7-Eleven. So if you're aware of everything on this slide, you're going to do really well in your interview because you're going to have some great knowledge that most people don't have. My other top tip is to read Seven & I Holdings management report if you want to get really deep into it, particularly if you're going for a management role. It is very much worth reading this because you'll get fantastic information about the whole company and what they're doing and how they're growing and where they are in the marketplace. So that's good to get very high level knowledge. So let's go on to question 4, which is why did you leave your last job? And you've got to be careful with this question. There are some things that you should mention and some things that you shouldn't mention. So if you're moving up or being promoted, that is a perfectly reasonable reason to be leaving your previous job. So if you're going for a management role at 7-Eleven and you're leaving a store role, that's a great reason. That's perfectly understandable. Relocation. So, for example, your partner's got another job somewhere else, and so you would love to stay at your previous job. You're very happy there, but because of family circumstances, you're having to move. So, being forced to move is quite a good reason because it's nothing to do with your job. It's all to do with something else. So, that can be a good almost excuse that just gets that question out of the way. Talk positively about 7-Eleven. So, instead of talking endlessly about your last job, talk about why you're really interested in this one. Restructuring is probably the best reason for having lost your job. So if your company downsized, the store you worked at was closed, that ends this question. You'll pass the question. That wasn't your fault. You had no control over it. They were getting rid of a specific area, and it wasn't about whether you were great or terrible. They were getting rid of everybody. And definitely mention this if it's true. Could easily go back. So would your last job instantly rehire you? Are you super confident that you would get your last job back? And if you mention that, then that really does satisfy them quite a lot. The way to screw this question up is to do any of the things on what they hate. They do not want to hear anything negative about your previous employer. So absolutely do not say anything at all bad about your last employer. If you do that, your chance of getting the job just crashed. Do not say anything negative about a manager that you previously worked with because the chances are you're going to be interviewed by either the person that owns the 7-Eleven franchise or by a manager at that store. And if you're bad mouthing your previous manager, they're going to think you're going to be a difficult employee to work with because you're not going to have good relationships with management, and that's going to be a problem. So they won't hire you. If you got fired, not a great thing to bring up. You want to try and explain that away. And if you talk about any disagreements or conflict with co-workers, that sets off alarm bells. And usually, the second you mention a disagreement or a falling out with another person, they're not going to hire you. They're going to pick someone else. They can't be bothered with anyone that they suspect could be a problem. It might be that you worked with the worst person imaginable and they were totally intolerable and you did nothing wrong, but simply mentioning that you had any conflict or disagreement, they will instantly assume that it was all your fault and just avoid you. Because 9 times out of 10, if you hire someone that's left a job because of conflict and disagreements, they are the problem. So definitely avoid that. So stick with the things that they like to hear and do not mention anything that they hate because it will be used against you. So before we look at some questions that you can ask them, here are some ways to get through the strengths and weaknesses question. So when you're asked about a strength, you have to start with a notable strength. And I'll give you some inspiration in a second of what those strengths could be. You need to provide evidence of it, and you have to make sure that your strength is relevant to 7-Eleven. So the best ones to talk about are reliability, if you can prove a track record of reliability in a previous job, experience working in customer service, any job that involves working with customers, use customer service as a strength because that's something that they really, really care about. And if you have any qualifications that are relevant to this job, definitely bring those up. And the way that you structure your answer is you say a substantial strength I can bring to 7-Eleven is, tell them about that strength. I can evidence this by, what is the evidence you can provide? The best evidence is a reference from a former manager or a qualification. So you want to bring a certificate for a qualification or speak to your previous manager and get them to write something as a reference and just say, if you contact this person, this is what they have to say. And that really does massively increase the strength of your argument here, and it's a great opportunity to really sell yourself to the company and get them interested in hiring you. But then the last thing you have to do is this strength will be useful to 7-Eleven because you have to actually explain why they should care about your strength. And if you do that, you're doing some of the work for them and giving you another reason, giving them another reason to hire you. So biggest weakness is the next one. So you have to start with a genuine weakness. They don't want to hear things like, I'm a total 100% perfectionist all the time. That is not really a weakness. You can maybe argue there's some negative aspects of it, but it's not really answering the question. The next thing you have to do is you have to be doing something to fix your weakness. And then, most importantly, the weakness has to be irrelevant to 7-Eleven or not particularly important for your job. And I'll give you some ideas of some acceptable weaknesses. An unacceptable weakness would be to say my offensive personality or something that is instantly going to get their back up and think that if we hire this person, they're going to be a problem. Some ways to structure your answer is to say a weakness I'm aware of is, and I'll give you some inspiration in a second, and I'm working to overcome this by. So once you've picked your weakness, think what you could actually do to overcome it. Could you get some extra training? Could you take a course? What can you do to get over that weakness? So a few ideas could be spelling, because the chances are if you're not in a management role, you're not going to be writing anything anyway. So that's not going to be a problem. Taking on too much, well, your role is going to be very well defined. So that's not going to be a problem. If you only speak English, that could be one to use if you're getting a job in a 7-Eleven store, which is in a heavily English speaking community. If you're getting a job in a region that's very heavily Spanish speaking, then that probably would be a weakness that's going to be relevant to 7-Eleven and you want to avoid it. But if you're applying to somewhere, particularly say rural, where virtually everyone in that community speaks English, then speaking only English isn't going to be a problem, and probably everybody else applying for the job can only speak English. If you're not applying for a management role, delegation is another one, because you're not going to be expected to delegate, so it didn't really matter. So stick to ones that are relevant to 7-Eleven, pick one from that list and talk about what you're doing to overcome it, and you will pass this one. So let's finish by looking at some questions that you should ask. So definitely ask them about what the next steps in the hiring process are. That shows that you're interested. That shows that you're really keen on getting the job, and hints of the fact that you would actually want to work there, that by the end of the interview, you're still interested in the job. Ask them what you can do now to be well prepared. They might say, you need to learn our products, you need to do this, you need to do that. And you can make the commitments there and then at the interview that if you hire me, I will have done these things before I even arrive. And that's a really positive thing to get in at the end of an interview. Definitely ask the manager, what is your favorite thing about working here? And share in their positivity and say that you would really like doing that. So you can have a positive conversation there. A clever question to finish the interview with is to ask them what the perfect 7-Eleven employee looks like, because they will describe to you exactly what they're looking for, and you can go over your previous answers and remind them of how you're actually ticking off a lot of what they are looking for, and that can put the manager in a good frame of mind to hire you. The last thing you have to do is one question needs to be made up on the day. You can't pre-plan for it, you just got to make it up. So go through the interview, listen carefully, make a mental note when something comes up, ask that question at the end. I wish you the best of luck in your 7-Eleven interview, and finally, thank you very much for watching.